Hello, everyone. Fuck, that was a terrible intro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on Surge Media Talks. I am Extra, and today we are going to be talking about a pattern that I have noticed, and I bet a lot of other people have noticed, but I want to make my video about it because I specifically have stuff that I want to talk about that I know. And today we're going to be looking at that pattern, and we're going to be looking at some new alleged weapons, right? And we're going to be talking about why they do and don't make sense at the same time. Now, first, there's one specific thing I need to point out, right? As far as the new weapons, the alleged weapons for Year 5 Season 1, they are leaks. They're not actual, they're just leaks, okay? They could be subject to change, and I personally feel like they will change a little bit. And I'll give my reasoning behind that in just a moment. Now, say I want to show this off real quick, right here, right? So this area right here, this is the Phantom Sight weapons. This right here, this is the Ember Rise weapons. This right here, these are the Shifting Tide weapons. These right here, these are the alleged Year 5 Season 1 weapons. I got this video specifically from Prodigio Pete. You can watch that video. I'm not saying that this is the case or not. I'm just specifically mentioning that just in case, as a disclaimer. Also, another thing right here. Due to the way that I format my stuff, I have the AUG A2, which is used by Wamai. I have that as a separate weapon. I have that as a weapon that is separate to the regular AUG A2, even though they are spelled the exact same. The only reason why I have them differently is because in the graph I have one for ACOG weapons and I have one for non-ACOG weapons. Further down here, like I have a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like I have all of this stuff, 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 it goes on for a while. And the point is that I separate the ACOG weapons versus the non-ACOG weapons, so that's why I have that as a different entry. But just bear with me, this is used by GSG9, okay? Now, let's take a look at some of the prospective weapons, and let's talk about the pattern that I see with them, right? As you can see right here from the CTU combos, every single season has been given at least one operator that has already been used, where both one of their primary and one of their secondaries are used by both the defender and the attacker individually. What do I mean? It's pretty obvious when you look at it, right? For Operation Phantom Sight, we had Valkyrie. Valkyrie has the MPX, the SPAS 12, and the D50. In Operation Phantom Sight, Nook was given her D50, and Warden was given her MPX. In Operation Ember Rise, Hibana and Echo both have the Supernova and the P229, and also the Bearing 9. Hibana and Echo, who both have both of those weapons. Amaru was given the Supernova, and Goyo was given the P229. Even further, Mira. In the same operation, Ember Rise, Mira has the Vector 45, the ITA 12L and S, and the USP 40. Amaru was given the RTA 12S, and Goyo was given the Vector 45. And in this season, Operation Shifting Tides, or technically next season because it's not officially released, Mute has the MP5K, the M590, the P226, and the SMG11. But specifically, in this season, Kali will be given the P226, and Wamai will be given the MP5K. This is a common theme. One of the already existing operators will have both their primary and, both one of their primaries and one of their secondaries given to one of each of the attacking and the defending operators. It's a very interesting theme, but it's a theme that Ubisoft has kept with up until this point. And I believe that it is a theme that will continue to be reutilized. So, let's specifically mention this too. Out of all of the CTUs that have been, out of all of the weapons that have been reused, there are 21. Out of all of those CTUs that have had reused weapons in the new operations, there have only been 10. That's right. There have been 10 CTUs that have had their weapons reused. Meanwhile, 21 weapons were reused. I have that list right here in front of you. You can look at that. So, what are the potential future weapons? Well, currently, the options are the G36C, the ARX200, or is it 2000? I actually don't know. I'm just going to say ARX200, the Mark 1 9mm, the Spaz 12, the MP5, the Bailiff 410, and the USP 40. Now, this actually both kind of makes sense and doesn't make sense as far as following the rubric that they have shown. Why does it make sense? Well, other than JTF2 and GIGN, these are all CTUs that we've seen before. GEO goes right in line with Mira. GIS goes right around with Maestro and Alibi. Seals, we've seen before with the MPX and the D50. GIGR, we've seen before with the TCSG-12. And the FBI SWAT, we've seen before with the 5.7. So other than the GIGN and the JTF2 weapons, this follows right in line with what kind of weapons you would expect to be reused. Now, that would lead us to conclude, well, are we going to have all of the weapons from those 10 CTUs reused? And I do believe that that is a very high possibility. I did not necessarily believe that up until recently. But now, I actually do believe that. Let's specifically talk about which one of the recycled weapons that have not been used but are from the same CTU and team. That means defender and attacker. If that is clear. That might not always be clear, however. Like when we're dealing with weapons that are both accessible by the attacking and defending teams, it's not always clear. So, let's start off with seals. We have the MPX and the D50 already. The only weapon that has not been reused that is part of Valkyrie's kit is the Spaz 12. However, if we look onto the other CTU, we also have the Mark 17 and the SR25 that have the possibility of being reused. For the SDU, we have the GS9, which is the T5, but I'm going to call it the GS9, and the QSD92, which in game is called the Q929 or 929. Those, I would say, are probably the most likely candidates to be reused, since the 612 SD since the 612 SD has been already reused. However, I do contend it is fairly possible that the 612 and the T95 could also be reused. As far as the SES goes, every single one of Mute and Smoke's weapons have already been reused. We already have reused the M590. We already have reused the P226. We already have reused the SMG11. We have already reused the MP5K, and we have already reused the FMG9 and the M590. Every single one of both Smoke and Mute's weapons have already been reused, which is actually crazy to think about. And as you can see here, we have the L85 and the HK33 as the only weapons. HK33, sorry, that's the AR33 in this game. So, let me... Those are the only weapons in that CTU that haven't been reused so far. So interesting to think about. Now, as for the 707th, we have the reused C75 and the reused SMG-12. Now, the thing is, both of those weapons are accessible by both an attacker and a defender. So what is the next possible weapon? The next possible weapon in the CTU? Well, that's unclear. It could be the Mark 14. It could be the K1A. However, either way, the Boss G, which actually I should move this here then. The Boss G is used by either team. So I would say it's actually most likely to be reused in the future. For the GEO, we have the USP-40 and the ITA-12L. Those are the weapons used by Mira, whereas the other two weapons by Mira, the Vector 45 and the ITA-12S, have already been reused in Operation Ember Rise. However, I do agree it's also somewhat plausible that the PDW-9 and the C7E by Jackal can also be reused. As for SAT, what is the next likely candidate to be reused? I would say the Bearing 9. So far, both the Supernova and the P229 have been reused. However, they are both accessible by Hibana and Echo. So it is unclear which one is actually being copied off of. So I say that it also is fairly possible that the Type 89 and the MP5SD could be reused. As for the FBI SWAT, the only reused weapon was the 5.7, which we saw given to Nook. Now, that could be from any of the 4 FBI operators. It could be from Castle, it could be from Pulse, even though they have the same loadout. It could be from Thermite, and it could be from Ash. So, there are mainly 5 possible weapons that could have been reused. The UMP-45, which is used by Castle and Pulse, the M1014, which is used by Castle, Pulse, and Thermite, the 5.56, which is used by Thermite, the G36C, the R4C, and the R4C, which are both used by Ash, and last but not least, the M45 Musok, which is used by all of the operators considering it's their other pistol. Moving on, we have the GSG-9 weapons. So far, the weapons that have been reused, it is very clear that the weapons that were reused were IQ's weapons, considering that it is the P12, the G8A1, and the AUG-A2. So, very clearly, they're all IQ's weapons. What is the only weapon of IQ's that hasn't been reused yet? The 5.52 Commando. However, I suppose that it is also very possible that the next weapons to be reused are the 416C, the MP7, and the M870, which are used by the defending operators. The GIGR. What are the weapons that haven't been used yet? Well, so far we've only seen the TCS G12. So, what are the weapons that haven't been used by that, operator? Well, the Automag and the AUG-A3 Power. I feel like those weapons are actually pretty likely to be reused, and I would love, and I mean love, to see the AUG-A3 Para being used by a future 2-speed or 3-speed operator. Not only do I feel like it's likely, I really want it to happen. However, looking at the other side of the table, the ARX and the AK-74 are also somewhat plausible weapons that have a very high potential of also being reused. As for the GIS, I actually didn't do what I should have done. What do I consider to be the next likely weapon to be reused by the GIS? Well, personally, I believe it is going to be the Bailiff, because that would be a pretty high indication of, what the CTU standard has been so far. However, you generally see like a defending, a secondary, then an attacking. Sorry, a secondary and then a primary, then a secondary, then a primary. But you never know. It's always possible. So, with all that information aside, let's take a look at some of the weapons that are being reused and take into consideration how plausible it is that those weapons will be reused in the future. First, let's start off with the G36C. How likely is it that the G36C will be reused? I would say very likely. Considering that it's already been used by the FBI SWAT, and we've already seen the FBI SWAT haven't had that weapon already reused, I consider that it's actually a pretty likely candidate to be reused in the future. Why? Well, specifically because Ash's other primary weapon is already very strong. You may have noticed a trend with all of the weapons that are being reused, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are often underused and are being reused for the sake of showing that weapon off. Of course, this does not always apply. For example, we have had the M590, which was already used by 4 operators, and now there's a 5th. We have already had the 5.7, which was already used by 4 operators, but is now being used by a 5th. And of course, we have the P12, which was also already being used by 4 operators and is now being used by a 5th. I should actually update this real quick, hold on. So, I consider the G36C to be a pretty underused and underappreciated weapon, which is why I consider it relatively likely to be reused. The ARX200. Is the ARX200 going to be reused? I consider it somewhat likely. Reason why is obviously the GIGR have already had one of their weapons reused. However, the weapon that was reused in question was a defender's weapon. And of course, as we know, the ARX200 is an attacker's weapon. But I still consider it somewhat likely considering that there is the GIGR connection. What is really stopping me from believing that this is the case, though, is the fact that the ARX200 has an attachment that's built onto it, that being the Nomad's air jab. I don't necessarily think that it's impossible that a weapon with a specific attachment connected to it being reused is impossible. It's just we haven't seen that before, and it would be very interesting to see that in the future, but you never know. Just like I would consider it very odd if Glaz's OTS-03 Dragunov SVU were to ever be reused, but without the flip side. Do I think it's possible? Of course. I just don't consider it to be very likely. And the same applies for the CSRX 900. The Mark 1 9mm. Do I consider it very likely that this weapon will be reused? Not at all. So far, we have no other weapons being reused by the JTF2. Plus, this is a very odd choice for a weapon. But, considering that it is a leak from a somewhat reliable source, I of course think it's going to happen, but I feel like it's the least likely. If any of these were to not be true, I feel like this would be most likely to not be true. For the given reason. The Spaz 12. How likely do I think that this weapon will be reused? Very likely. I consider this to be the most likely weapon to be reused out of all of them. The Spaz 12 is the only weapon from Valkyrie's kit that hasn't been reused already, and I feel like it's just natural that it gets its spot in the pick. Especially considering that the Spaz 12 is relatively underused in comparison to the MPX. I do believe it deserves a little bit of spot in the light, which is why I consider it so likely that it would be reused. The MP5. How likely do I consider this weapon to be reused? Somewhat. The thing is that the MP5, as you all know, has an ACOG. That would pretty much require this defender to be a 1-speed. Unless if they went the route of removing the ACOG, which would be interesting. The GIGN CTU hasn't been used at all, and I don't necessarily consider it the most likely to be used in the future, but I do consider it to be more likely than the Mark 1 9mm, thanks to the MP5's pretty nice spot that it has in the world stage. The Bailiff 410, how the Taurus Judge, how likely do I consider this weapon to be reused? Somewhat. We have already had the Chiappa Rhino, or whatever it's called in the game, the Karatos 357. We've already had that weapon being reused, and the only other weapon that both of the operators can use, which is the Bailiff 410 and the ACS 12, both of those operators can possibly have those weapons. So, do I consider it likely that it'll be reused? Somewhat. It's not necessarily. Actually, you know what? These are both on the same team. The team isn't unclear. It's just. But the Bailiff 410 does definitely get a little bit overshadowed by the amazing Chiappa Rhino, and it is really good. But it still deserves a place. the USP-40. How likely do I think it'll be reused? This is the second most likely, I would say, to be reused. We've already had the ITA-12S and Mira's Vector 45 being reused. How likely is it that the USP-45 or USP-40 will be reused? I would consider it to be very likely. I don't consider it very likely that the ITA-12L will ever be reused, but I do consider it to be more likely than seeing one of Jackal's new weapons. So, is it right on the plate? I would believe that this makes sense. Now, of course, looking at this list, there is the very common trend, right? As far as do I believe that this is legit and this is actually what's going to happen? Do I believe it? I do, mostly because of the fact that it's a leak and most of the leaks are true, but of course, it is a leak, so it could not be true. I don't know. Now, how likely is it statistically that these weapons will be reused? Well, although most of the weapons follow the common theme of being used by already existing CTUs that have already had their weapons reused, most of them do, but not all of them. What about the trend of the CTU combos? Well, as you can see by looking at this list, no two weapons are being used by the same CTU. Every single weapon is being used by a different CTU, which is why I don't consider it, especially because we don't have that CTU combo thing, like with the Valkyrie having the D50 and the MPX being reused by both a defending and an attack rating operator, but not respectively. With Habana and Echo with the Supernova and the P229 and so on. So that also breaks that common trend. And last but not least, what about as far as the weapons go and their usability? Well, I would not consider it to be extremely likely that the ARX 200 would be reused, specifically because of that Nomad air jab. Of course, you could always take that off, but we haven't had that happen so far. And of course, they could always break the trend, after all. I never thought that an LMG would land in the hands of a defender, or a shield for that matter, but, we have Maestro and Clash to prove me wrong on that. So, Ubisoft is pretty good about breaking the trends that they have set. But as far as the trends that they have set so far, I do think it's pretty likely that some of these weapons will make it, and some will not. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something new, or if you took something else into perspective, that's cool. Be sure to share if you think that this would be interesting information for other people to know about. And, if you want me to do another analysis video, I might. I have a couple of other analyses videos I used to have on my other channel, but I don't do them anymore. I'm not worrying too much about it, but that's just how the train goes. All right, take it easy. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a nice day.
よろしくね。